Hello students, so today we are going to talk basic ideas related to surface tension and viscosity, and this is generally for the 8th grade science. Now here what do you see? Have you seen this? You see this is a paper pin, and interestingly it is floating on water. How is it possible? Do you see the structure? Look closely. It's as if the water is not just a plain surface as we used to know, but it is behaving like a membrane above which you see the dip above the look at the surface as if it's a membrane above which the paper pin can float. And this we are going to talk about. See another example. This is an insect, water strider. See how it is able to float above. Look over here. There is a dip above. It's not, it's one of the legs is not inside the water. It's just floating, just like the paper pin. How is this happening? So this is what we are going to talk about. Basically, what I am going to tell you is surface tension is the tendency of a liquid surface to shrink. See, this is the shrinking feature. And why is this happening? They shrink so as to have a minimum surface area as much as possible. See, isn't it interesting? So surface tension is basically the tendency of the liquid to shrink so as to have a minimum surface area. Okay, now there is another thing that we are going to study, and that is frictional force. Come on, it exists between the layers of the liquid as well. And as usual, it resists motion. But this time, it resists the motion between the relative layers of the liquid. And this frictional force, in the case of liquid, we call this viscous force. So this is overall what we are going to study today. Let's start. Hello students, let us try to understand the very important concept of surface tension using an activity. Okay, so what's the activity? The activity goes like this. You take a beaker full of water. Okay, so this is the level of water, so full of water. Next, you put a tissue paper. Let me use a different color for the tissue paper. So this is a tissue paper above the surface of the water. So you will see that the tissue paper can be floating like this. Okay, now after this you put very gently. Okay, it is important that you do this very gently. Put a paper clip above it, and then you watch closely what is happening. Now before doing this activity, let me tell you that if you again take a same beaker full of water, and this time you just put a paper pin above it without the tissue paper, what you will observe is that the paper will simply sink. It will sink down. There is no problem with that. However, this time when you put the paper clip above the tissue paper and you gently use a pencil to poke, slowly dip, hit this tissue paper, you will observe that slowly the tissue paper will sink down, but the paper clip, it will float. It's interesting. So previously the paper clip sank down, but this time what is happening is that the tissue paper sinks down. However, the paper clip, which is much denser than water, it will float. Now the question is, why is this happening? You see, just like how matter has the property of mass and volume, similarly, you see, liquids have a very interesting, there are so many properties of them. They have mass, volume, okay, density and all that. And along with it, they also have a property which is surface tension. Surface tension. And what does this do? Basically, you see, let me explain what is happening over here. You see, what is happening is that this property of water in this particular activity, that is water surface tension, it creates a skin, sort of skin, just like our body. It creates a skin on the water surface, and this surface tension is so strong that it can support the weight of the paper clip even though the paper clip is denser than water. So you understand? You see, if this is your water surface and this is the paper clip above it, so the weight of the paper clip is acting down, but because of the tension in the water molecules, because of this water surface tension, there is a force in the cohesive force on the molecules, and they are able to resist the weight of the paper pin. So you see, when the tissue is removed, the paper clip is left resting on the water surface, as if the water surface is like a membrane, a skin. It has a skin. So who is supporting this? Molecules, they are being supported obviously by the cohesive forces, intermolecular forces. Now you see, this activity of the flotation of paper clip on water, it basically demonstrates the presence of surface tension. Okay, you see, as I was saying, paper clip being denser than water, it totally sinks. However, by carefully placing the paper clip on a small piece of tissue paper of the water surface and then gently removing the tissue, the paper clip can float. And this is all happening since water has surface tension. And this is not over. You have probably seen in ponds and lakes small insects which are able to float on water, insects floating and sliding on water. And again, this is all because insects don't have any special property or special power. This is just because water has surface tension. Okay, so as I have been explaining, you see, this all activity, this flotation of pin, this is happening because the water molecules on the surface, which tend to contract themselves like the molecules of an elastic membrane. So if this is the water molecules together, then as a result of the pin, weight of the pin, they are being somewhat stretched, but still they are connected by the intermolecular attractive forces. Okay, so you see, there is a force which exist on them, and this force tends to minimize the surface area of water, and the paper clip is balanced by the molecules on the water surface that is now behaving like a stretched elastic membrane. And this is the reason why the paper clip is not submerging. Now let me tell you about the next application of surface tension. So why do you think are raindrops spherical in shape? Again, why do you think, or rather, more specifically, how do you think the water rises up in a tree or plant against the force of gravity? Now, suppose you are living in a high-riser building, okay, and how do you get your tap water? There is a tank overhead, or there, right, and it has to be stored. Water needs to be stored in here, from which you get your water in the various floors. But the question is, how does water is stored in the overhead tank? For this, we use a water pump which pumps water first to the overhead tank, and then afterwards, using the force of gravity itself, water flows to the different levels. That's the procedure, right? Now see what happens in a tree or plant. Where is the water pump? Here. The roots, they are collecting the water, okay, and how is the water going up above? Where is the water pump? Have you wondered? Actually, there is no water pump over here. This is all happening because of this simple feature, surface tension. Okay, now next you must be wondering, what is this property? Well, of course, as I have been saying, it's a property of liquid. You see, the molecules of a liquid, experience a force which contracts the extent of their surface area. So you see, I am talking about the surface of a liquid. A liquid, you can see, you have seen, liquid can assume any shape. You can assume the shape of the jar in which it is placed. Now let us consider the surface of the liquid. Here I am talking about the surface. On the surface there are molecules, right? This is the surface layer. And you see, because of the intermolecular attractive forces, a force exert on each and other molecules sideways. And as a result of this force, if we put some object above it, like an insect, they can stand above the water molecules. They can use this tension on the molecules as a result of the property surface tension. Okay, now the basic idea is that the molecules of the liquid experience a force, okay, which contracts the extent of their surface area as much as possible. Okay, it is trying to contract the surface area as much as possible so as to have the minimum value. Okay, now this amount of force acting per unit length on the surface of a liquid is known as surface tension. So what does surface tension do? Effectively, it is trying to minimize the surface area as much as possible. That's the basic idea. Okay, and so what's the unit? Force per unit length, that is Newton per meter. Some of the interesting applications of surface tension in our daily life. You see, in plants, what happens? The water molecules rise up due to surface tension. Xylem tissues are very narrow vessels present in plants. Now, water molecules are absorbed by the root, and these vessels help the water to rise upward due to capillary action. And this capillary action is caused by the surface tension of water. Next, during heavy storm, ships are damaged due to the surface tension of water. Now, by pouring oil or soap powder into the sea, sailors try to reduce this impact. Can you imagine? Interesting, isn't it? Next, you see, what do you see over here? This is an insect, water strider. And you see, this water strider, it just slides on the water surface. And how it is doing so? The insect is doing this because of the surface tension of water. If water has no surface tension, then the insect will simply drown. It won't be able to slide above the water. Now, so till now we have studied the property of surface tension for liquid. Now it's time that we study yet another property, which is viscosity for liquids. So for that, we have to take small quantity of different kinds of liquid like coconut oil, honey, water and ghee, 4 different types. And now take 4 separate glass plates and put 1 drop of each of the liquid above it. 1 drop. And what do you do after that? You slowly raise the glass plates, and you will see that in this case what you will observe is that, so if these are the glass plates, right, what you will observe is that the drop of liquid will float down slowly. It will slide down, not float, slide down slowly. Interestingly, you will observe that each liquid moves with a different speed. You will observe that water flows much faster compared to the other liquids, and even coconut oil flows with a moderate speed. Ghee will float very slowly, honey will also float very slowly. So here we are trying to find the reason for these different speeds. What is the reason? You see, the reason is that, let me show you. Yes, the reason is that between the layers of the liquid which is in motion, there is a frictional force. So what is happening if you closely observe? So suppose, let me zoom this structure. So if this is the plate, okay, and this is one of the drops of liquid. So what is it? There are water molecules all over. Okay, now so this is the overall structure. Now you can consider that overall there is a layer. So this is the lowest layer, the skin of the drop. Above it we have another layer of molecules, another layer above it. Slowly, okay, now what you see is happening is that between these three layers, the first layer, second layer, and say the third layer, there is a frictional force, okay, parallel to the layers of the liquid. There is a frictional force in between, and this frictional force effectively opposes the motion of the liquid layers while they are in motion. So if this lower layer is moving in this direction, then the just layer above it, it will try to resist this motion because of the frictional force between these two layers. Okay, and the frictional force acting between the successive layers of the liquid, which acts in order to oppose the relative motion of the layer. So basically this frictional force, friction just opposes motion, this we know. And here in the liquids, even the liquids are not spared. Okay, what is happening is that in the case of liquid, the different layers, they are trying to resist the relative motion of another layer, and this is viscosity. So what's the definition? The definition goes like this: the frictional force acting between the successive layers of the liquid, which act in order to oppose the relative motion of the layer, is known as viscous force. Such a property of liquid is called viscosity. And you see, viscosity, this viscous force is actually measured by a unit called poise in CGS system, or kg per meter per second, or Newton per meter square in SI units. So effectively it is Newton second per meter square, also Pascal second. This is yet another unit. So now you understand, friction is also present between the different layers of a liquid, and this is known as, this type of frictional force between the layers, which again causes the, resists the motion of the various layers, is known as viscosity.